Questions
Oral questions. Questions orales. Honorable leader of the opposition to be next Prime Minister Canada, Pierre.
Just 80 days after becoming Prime Minister, Stephen Harper promised to put an end to, or managed to put an end to, tariffs on softwood lumber. But this Prime Minister caved in and allowed Donald Trump to reimpose those tariffs, and Mr. Biden doubled them. Stephen Harper entered into a deal with Barack Obama in order to avoid the
Come on, translator.
Buy America Act. Can we have an election so that
Obama.
Canadians could have a prime minister who will stand up for Canadians? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, what we see once again is the Conservative leader saying anything and everything. While we stand up against Donald Trump, we stood up against him when he wanted to renegotiate
No, you didn't.
NAFTA. And it was the Conservatives, including Stephen Harper, who were encouraging us to back down and not offend the Americans. On the contrary, we stood up for ourselves. We protected supply management. We protected steel and aluminum workers. We protected Canadian jobs all across this country, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. This Liberal Prime Minister not only capitulated to Obama, Trump, and Biden, he also gave $500 million worth of investment that left this country, impoverishing Canadians in the process. 10 years ago, the New York Times said life in Canada has the wealthiest middle class in the world. And Canada seems to be outstripping even the U.S. Today, it's the opposite. Canadians are poorer than Americans. Why is this Prime Minister creating jobs for Americans?
Yeah.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Because Trudeau hates Canada, man.
The opposition leader continues to claim that Canada's broken, but at the same time, he wants to get rid of the investments that will help Canadians, for example, with the construction of new homes. The millions of dollars that we've sent to the government of Quebec to build new affordable housing, if it was up to him, he would cut and impose austerity on Quebecers and all Canadians. They don't want that. We don't want that. We need to invest to help alleviate the housing crisis, and that not the kind of policies the opposition leader is proposing.
Minister Stephen Harper only 80 days to get a softwood lumber deal that put an end to the tariffs and reimbursed what were already collected. And then this Liberal Prime Minister capitulated, allowed Trump to reimpose the tariffs and Biden to double them. Harper got us an exemption to Buy America. This Prime Minister then capitulated, allowed Trump and Biden to reimpose them, hurting our construction workers and our providers of steel. Why can't we have a carbon tax election so that we can have a Prime Minister that no longer capitulates to the Americans, but instead will stand up for Canada?
There you go. And that's something that Trump is going to respect when Pierre stands up to him like that.
I just answered that question in French. Allow me instead to take a moment to condemn unequivocally the violence we've seen in South Asian communities across the country over the past few nights. Let me be
Yeah, the Hindu temples and stuff.
The individuals who are inciting violence and division and hatred in no way represent either the Sikh community or the Hindu community in Canada. At a time of Diwali, Bandi Chor Divas, we're seeing communities come together to celebrate their diversity and their strength. We will continue to stand for the unity of Canadians.
Okay, but can you answer the question?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Sir, this is a Wendy's.
New York Times 10 years ago. Life in Canada, home of the world's most affluent middle class. Median income in Canada appears to have surpassed median income in the United States. Oh, what a decade can do. Now, American workers make almost $20,000 more than their Canadian counterparts. They get twice as much investment every single year. The gap between our per capita GDP and that of the United States is now the worst in a century after this Prime Minister's rising taxes, bureaucracy, and blocking of energy projects. I know why Harris and Trump want to create jobs for Americans, but why does this Prime Minister want to help them?
There you go.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the silence of the Conservative leader is deafening when it comes to what's happening in the South Asian communities right now.
He's already condemned it, bro.
Not only is he not stepping...
All right, every question and answer today should be about the Hindus and the Sikhs.
Must stand together, and all South Asian Canadians, Sikh, Hindu, Jain, Buddhist, are celebrating together this weekend. But he even refuses to take the issue seriously enough to get the security clearance necessary to be briefed on threats to Canada and to Canadians. That's not leadership, Mr. Speaker.
I hope Pierre just gets up and goes, I condemn, answer the question.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Now you know his real agenda. He wants to distract from all the economic misery he's called at home. And so he uses divisions here at home. These divisions are the result of him. Under his leadership, we've seen a 251% increase in hate crimes, fire bombings of synagogues, bullets shot at Jewish children's schools, 100 churches burned and vandalized, and now
W for bringing up the churches.
Riots on the streets of Brampton. This never happened before this Prime Minister. Does he take ownership for the divisions he's caused and the violence that has resulted?
Good job on bringing up the churches, my guy.
Order. Colleagues,
Mute the microphone, I dare you.
ask members, please.
I'll do another petition.
Far into the House to please not take the floor unless they are recognized by the Speaker. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, people watching that last answer will know and note the assuredness with which the Leader of the Opposition declared all the causes and the sources of the terrible violence we're seeing, when the reality is he refuses to take the necessary briefings that our security agencies are offering him to understand the threats to Canada. Why won't he get the security clearance necessary to protect Canadians?
Bro can't answer a single question.
Order.
Mute the microphone, I dare you.
Colleagues, it does not do well when on one side of the House is asked to keep quiet. The other side of the House should do the same. All members should do the same.
Who here doesn't have a family doctor? Well, 5 million Canadians don't. Now, Loblaws owns Maple, and a family doctor working at Maple's will charge you $80 a month per person to see a doctor. Now, things are gotten so bad, this is predatory. The Prime Minister lets you down, and then Galen Weston swoops in to profit off it. Why is this Prime Minister letting Galen Weston profit off of people's pain?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that it is the provincial area of jurisdiction to deliver health care in this country, but it is the federal responsibility to make sure that that health care remains public and universal and single payer. And that is exactly what we're doing by investing a record $200 billion in health care over the coming years that will oblige the provinces to invest in public health care, to hire more doctors, particularly family doctors, to reduce wait times and to improve their mental health services. These are things that Canadians expect, including the federal government expecting it of the provinces.
This Liberal NDP Prime Minister presides over the worst GDP per person growth since the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And it's no surprise his high taxes and woke policies like carbon tax scams job-killing capital gains tax hike, and oil and gas cap have made Canadians poorer. In fact, U.S. GDP grew 2.8% as Canadians' GDP per person declined for 2 years, driving out business, investment, and jobs. Will this Prime Minister axe the tax hikes that make Canadians poorer?
The Honourable
Oh, here we go with the little chihuahua.
What the Conservative won't talk about is the record level of investment we have seen in the country, Mr. Speaker.
Bro, shut your mouth.
For Canadians watching at home, people are wondering, Mr. Speaker, they're really wondering, why is the leader of the Conservative not getting his security clearance, Mr. Speaker? What does he have to hide, Mr. Speaker? People on the street of Canada are asking, Mr. Speaker, get the clearance, get the briefing, get on and do your job, man.
Do your job. How about you? Shut up.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
We're talking about the Canadians. They're starving and they want to make personal attacks on the Conservative leader. These economic arsonists will do anything to deflect away from their failed record. Canadian workers are $22,000 poorer than U.S. workers. If Canada had just kept pace with the U.S. over the last 2 years, Canadian workers would have $6,200 more every year. And now Canada is poorer than Alabama. Why don't these economic arsonists call a carbon tax election so Canadian workers can finally fire them?
All of Canada is poorer than the state of Alabama? Look at Pierre standing up and barking.
And people with disabilities.
Mr. Speaker, we won't take any lessons from the Conservatives on how to deliver for Canadians. While they keep their headed agenda, Mr. Speaker, we know exactly what they'll do. They'll cut dental care for 9 million Canadians. They'll end $10 a day childcare. They'll cancel the National School Food Program, Mr. Speaker. Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, won't tell you their plan because they don't want Canadians to know. Just like, Mr. Speaker, their leader won't get the security
Sweet home Alabama, no doubt.
Shame on them. What are they hiding?
The Honourable Member from Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, more bad news from experts. Last week, economists at National Bank released an analysis that said, quote, GDP per capita has fallen by about 4% cumulatively since 2022, which is unprecedented outside a recession. This is a made-in-Canada per person per capita GDP recession caused by a government that's hiked taxes on everything, energy, housing, banks, investment, that's driving out investment and making Canadians poorer. When will the government admit its mistake and reverse course on tax hikes that are driving out investment like they reversed course on so many other issues?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives would like to make comparisons with the United States, I have one for them. Canada ran a deficit of just 1.1% of GDP in 2023, Mr. Speaker. That's compared to a 6.3% of GDP deficit in the United States of America, Mr. Speaker. We have made sure to be responsible with our balance sheet, and we are doing it while supporting vulnerable Canadians, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives' hidden agenda is to cut programs that Canadians rely on.
The Conservatives are laughing like hyenas.
From Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I'll quote another expert relative to Canada's position with the United States. The Governor of the Bank of Canada, who last week said, quote, foreign capital, even some Canadian capital, is going to the United States because they can get faster regulatory approvals, end quote. Yeah. 2 years ago in Washington, the finance minister in her speech said, quote, Canada must and will show similar generosity in fast-tracking, for example, the energy and mining projects our allies need to heat their homes and to manufacture electric vehicles, end quote. Simple question. Can the government tell us which mining and energy projects they have fast-tracked since the speech in Washington?
Not one.
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, I know that member to be an honourable.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Member.
They're going to tell him to get a security clearance or something stupid.
To not take the floor, and that's recognized by the Chair. The Honourable Member. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons from the top.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that member to be someone who cares about Canada's standing in the world and who I thought cared about Canada's national security as well. But what I find perplexing and what I think must be difficult for him to understand is why is it that the leader of the official opposition is refusing to get a security clearance? Why is it that he would rather ignore the threats to his national security? What is it that he's trying to hide, or what is it that he doesn't want to know? The NCCOP reported that a conservative leadership campaign was under threat by foreign actors. Is that something he doesn't want to know about?
Called it. I fucking called it.
After 9 years and 3 U.S. presidents, the NDP, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister has failed to get a deal with the Americans on softwood lumber, while our previous Conservative government got it done within 80 days. 2 more mills in BC are closing because of this Prime Minister's incompetence.
Yes, sir.
Wayne and Marie Harder have seen their logging businesses in Fort St. John destroyed by these NDP Liberals. I asked Wayne yesterday, who would you fire in this NDP Liberal government? Wayne's answer, all of them. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing for forestry families and call an election today?
There you go. Way to represent PG, my guy.
I'm going to ask once again the colleagues at the end, particularly the member from New Westminster Burnaby and Timmins St. James, Bay James, to please not take the floor unless recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Minister for International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say to forestry industry workers and those in the sector how important they are to Canada's economy, and indeed how important they are to building affordable homes in this country. I know that we continue to work very hard and we have said that getting a deal is indeed the best way to go. But I think what Canadians want to know is why it is that on this side of the House, when we renegotiated NAFTA, on this side of the House, when we stood up to defend tariffs against steel.
Bro, even her poppy's made in China.
We are always standing up for workers. What they are doing on the other side of the House.
Look at that. That's not even a real poppy. It's made in China.
The Honourable Member for Miramichi, Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost to Canada's economy. While the Prime Minister dismissed his failure on softwood lumber as a small issue, the U.S. slapped a 14.5% tariff on Canada. This negatively impacts the 24,000 New Brunswick forestry workers. The Prime Minister has failed with 3 straight U.S. presidents, while Prime Minister Harper got a deal in just 80 days. When will the Prime Minister finally stand up for New Brunswick forestry workers?
Yeah. Bunch of suits and ties making rules for everyone else.
And energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on this side of the House have been working very hard in the interests of forestry workers and forestry companies here in Canada. We are working very hard to progress negotiations with the Americans. We are working very hard on value-added forestry. It is something that we are committed to continuing to do, including working with Irving Forest Products in New Brunswick. I would say, though, that on this side of the House, we are working very hard in the best interests of Canadians. We would expect elected officials across the board to be doing that, and Canadians are asking why the Leader of the Opposition will not get his security clearance.
Exactly. Because it's a gag order. Let's move on.
The Honourable Member from Prince Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. Just weeks after the U.S. hit Canada with a 14.5% tariff on softwood lumber, this Prime Minister dismissed its failures and the impact on Canadian workers and the impact of our forestry sector as small issues. Since the PM's comments in New York City, 2 sawmills in BC have closed, putting over 500 workers out of work. Canadian producers have paid $9 billion in tariffs to the U.S. From softwood lumber to Buy America. Why has this Prime Minister repeatedly backed down to the U.S.?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government always stands up for Canadian workers and it always stands up for Canadian industry.
You're cutting 112,000 jobs because you're cap on emissions.
While the Conservative Party of Canada said to capitulate. When it came to supporting our steel and aluminum workers, we stood against those tariffs. We hit back hard. What did the other side say, Mr. Speaker? The Conservative Party of Canada said capitulate. When it comes to standing up for Canada's national security, we will always do that. But what about the Conservative Party of of Canada. Mr. Speaker, their leader won't even get a security clearance to know what's really going on. What is it he's trying to hide? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, the majority of young Canadians have now abandoned the dream of home ownership. While housing starts fail to keep up with Canada's population growth, the Americans are building 4 times more housing per new resident. Conservatives have announced a plan to axe the federal sales tax on new homes, and we have called on the provinces to do the same. Our plan means more housing and savings for young Canadians who are desperately trying to enter the housing market. Will the NDP Liberals reignite the dream of homeownership and axe the federal GST on housing?
Here. That would help tremendously.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
The list is growing, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday we learned in the Toronto Star that the MP for Kamloops on the Conservative side has joined many other Conservative colleagues to advocate for programs that their leader wants to cut. Programs like the Housing Accelerator Fund that are going to lead to more home building in his community and communities across the country, Mr. Speaker. They want to make these cuts. They have no vision on housing. Therefore, they have no vision on the future for Canada, Mr. Speaker. It's not serious.
I ask the Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson Caribou, as well as the member for Coast of Bays Central Notre Dame to please not take the floor unless they are recognized by the Speaker. I thank the Honourable Members. The Honourable Member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Speaker, that wannabe minister is so desperately clinging to their $8 billion failed Liberal housing photo op program that has built 0 houses. Policy commitment made in the past 2 decades. And those aren't my words, Mr. Speaker. That's what the West End Home Builders Association has said. And the Canadian Real Estate Association also called it a positive step towards making home ownership more attainable for Canadians. Will the NDP Liberals listen to the experts and axe the federal sales tax on housing?
That would help out a lot of people, man. Pierre's standing up and barking at Trudeau.
Housing, infrastructure, and communities.
It's a difficult subject for them, Mr. Speaker, obviously. The MP for Kamloops, the MP for Simcoe North, the MP for Central Okanagan, the MP, and he's the best friend of the Conservative leader, the MP for St. Albert Edmonton, Mr. Speaker, went behind the back of the Conservative leader to advocate for the Accelerator Fund that's going to lead to more home building. In this House of Commons, on social media, they parrot their leader's talking points, but they don't believe in those talking points, evidently, Mr. Speaker, because they're advocating for good government programs that are going to get more homes built for Canadians.